let me know. Again, you can message me in the chat. I'm going to hand it over to John. I'm so glad to have this presentation happening and great to be working with you again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kelsey. And again, appreciate it. We had a great event last year about the same time, and looking forward to tonight's conversation. I think it's very timely. I am John Paulson, the coordinator of the North Shore Forest Collaborative. The Collaborative, for those who don't know, is an association of natural resource agencies and non-governmental organizations that are very interested in these types of subjects on the North Shore, but also and primarily the landowners such as yourselves who have property in this area along the coastline. The North Shore Forest Collaborative actually is celebrating its 10-year anniversary this year, if you can believe it. It's been very active. I've been involved in the last 3 years. It's been my pleasure, and it's been great working together with all the people who are involved in this project of trying to restore the health and vigor of our ecological systems along the North Shore. The focus area geographically for the North Shore Forest Collaborative is from the Canadian border down to just outside of the Duluth boundary, and then from the coastline inland about 3.5 miles. So that's, if you can picture that strip of land along the North Shore. And so that's really our focus, trying to restore the forest along that area. Tonight's presentation, and I promise you, I'm not sharing any slides tonight, so I'll save your eyes. But tonight's presentation was brought to us when Justin Main, who is a forester with Arrowhead Electric Cooperative, approached both Molly, the executive director at Sugarloaf, and myself to talk about what could be done under Powerline rights-of-way that will help enhance the habitat that we have in that area, but also be more sustainable over time, and also the fringe forest along those rights-of-way as well. What are some of the best ways to approach that? What are the best ways to maintain it and work together with the electric co-op, the landowners working together with them? So tonight, if you're on the wrong Zoom, it's still worth listening to. This is maintaining the North Shore forest habitat under electric power lines. What's a landowner to do? We have with us tonight Justin Main, forester for Arrowhead Electric. He's going to do a presentation, and then followed by Dan Schutte. We've asked Dan to join us with his expertise in planting and native habitat. He's with Shoreview Natives. He's the owner proprietor of that organization. And then in the audience are a lot of experts, but in particular, I want to call out Molly Thompson, executive director of Sugarloaf, the North Shore Stewardship Association. And then we have one of our founding members of the North Shore Forest Collaborative, and that's Wayne Russ. Wayne is retired from the Forest Service, but highly active as a landowner on the North Shore. And then Mike Reichenbach, many of you know Mike, formerly and now retired from University of Minnesota Extension. So we're glad to have them to help provide perspective, thoughts, and ideas, and can certainly answer questions as well as our experts that are presenting today. So I'm done with my conversation. Again, thank you again, Kelsey, and greatly appreciate your facilitation tonight. And with that, I will hand it over to Justin Main, forester with Arrowhead Electric Cooperative.
Hello, yeah, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's kind of been a long time planning and just working with different agencies and committees that are out there. My name is Justin Main. I'm the forester for Arrowhead. I've been working with Arrowhead since about 2018. I was a contractor up until this year, and then I was hired internally. So my job has kind of been ever evolving, and we'll kind of get into that on historically what has happened with the right-of-way management versus kind of what we're moving into now. Some background on me, as I actually moved up to the North Shore back in 2008, worked for Lake County Forestry for quite a few years, and then tried a couple other jobs. And back in 2018, got hooked in here with Arrowhead, and we've been doing a lot of good stuff, and it's very enjoyable and love living up here. So I will start my slideshow and then we can go from there. we go. So I think that should be looking good. Is that good, Kelsey? Okay. So kind of start with an overview about Arrowhead. Generally speaking, our mission is providing safe, reliable, and environmentally friendly utility services. A big part of tonight is going to be about the environmental friendly and what we're kind of doing with the landscape. We have roughly 4,300 electrical accounts, 3,400 internet accounts, and just shy of 2,000 phone accounts through the Arrowhead Cooperative. And these numbers are all from our 2020 annual report. So I know this year has been a busy year for us, and we've definitely added a lot of people and more line miles too, just throughout 2021 here. So as of last year, we had a total of 557 miles of line. 333 of that was overhead line, and 224 of that was underground lines. And that includes the electric lines and the fiber optic lines. They kind of, you could double it basically. Most of the fiber run along with our electric up here. This is kind of a coverage area for us. It's pretty much all of Cook County and goes into Lake County a little bit at the far southwestern part there. So basically for the right of ways and for the easements, there's basically 3 lines that are out there. We've got the 3-phase lines, which are your primary lines, where there's 3 lines that are kind of running parallel to each other. The easement for that is a 40-foot easement, so that's 20 feet from the center line going to the wood line. A single phase line, primary line, is basically where the lines are all stacked on top of each other. It just looks like one line kind of going down the right of way. That's a 30-foot easement, so 15 feet on either side of the center line. Then we go into kind of secondary lines, which would be from your transformer to the meter. Some people have the meters directly on their house, others it might be on the pole with the transformer. But that secondary line is kind of a 6 to 10 foot area that we like to maintain there. For the primary lines, for the single phase and 3-phase, we basically have the entire floor and then floor to ceiling, we call it. So we go all the way up the, the side of the easement there, versus with the secondary lines, we keep, you can picture it as a nice walking path underneath, and then a good 5-foot bubble plus around there. So you'll have tree canopy cover above your secondary lines. There's a lot less voltage in there, but still need to keep them clear so the trees aren't kind of whacking the lines and interfering with that kind of stuff. And then for our underground lines, we maintain a 15-foot right away for that. So basically about half of what the single phase primary would be. So the reason for the easements and the reason for the right-of-way management comes down to safety. And now the safety is kind of a big one. That's not only for the public, it's for the linemen, kind of across the board there. A lot of times when the power goes out or a tree hits the line, it's usually not a sunny day in the middle of the day. It's 2 o'clock in the morning with 50-mile-per-hour winds and rain and snow and all that good stuff. So keeping that wide open and kind of clear not only helps protect the lines in general from a lot of the storms, but also for when the linemen are out there working. And if people happen to be out there during a storm too and come across the down line, if we don't have kind of the clear right away, it's real hard for us to kind of determine to walk through the brush to even find the line that may still be energized. Reliability is another reason, kind of ties into the safety factor that if you have trees that are kind of swaying and hitting the lines, that can cause blips. Trees that just outright fall and take out lines and poles. That's where we get a lot of our outages. Wildlife is kind of a big concern on unmanaged right-of-way. Specifically, if the tree branches are real close to the line, you'll have a lot more squirrel activity and stuff like that. So it helps kind of keep that down. Again, protection of the public people and infrastructures. They're also used as fire breaks, which we all kind of know is kind of a big deal up here. Sometimes emergency access routes, whether that's for search and rescue or just for the linemen to get in and take care of an issue that we have going on. So kind of historically speaking, Arrowhead has had just a mechanical clearing only, which basically means on a 7 or 8 year rotation, they would kind of go through and just mow the right of way. It was more of a reactive kind of plan, just because it's such a large geographical area. It was real tough to kind of keep up on that. Based on the terrain, rock outcrops and all that kind of stuff, not everything could be mowed. So some places might have gotten missed through different cycles versus moving forward in Arrowhead back in 2017, started looking at an integrated vegetation management system. So basically the IVM, what that comes down to, I'll kind of read this off, is a system of managing plant communities in which compatible and incompatible vegetation is identified, thresholds are considered, control methods are evaluated, and selected controls are implemented to achieve a specific objective. So what this basically means is instead of just using one tool and indiscriminately going out there and clearing the land, we use multiple tools, use a lot more science, think about the forest that's out there, the soils that are out there, integrate kind of that whole realm of what we're looking at versus just straight cutting anything and everything within the right of way. So basically with an IVM based system, the strategy includes, like I said, using all the tools in our toolbox to actively manage the right of way corridors, to create relatively stable communities of compatible plants to disadvantage of the tall growing tree species. This is kind of the big point of what we're talking about tonight. With the IVM system, we're not indiscriminately cutting out there. We're actually creating the new habitat, different habitat that is suitable within the right of way versus what would just naturally grow there if just left to its own devices. And that turns into the non-IVM system. So just mechanically cutting, you'll have a mower out there that's non-selective and, chews up everything and anything in its way, whether it's a birch tree or flowering plants, different things like that. And then there again, just the straight mowing is more of a reactive management technique to what is out on the landscape without trying to manage it and see what else we could do to it to make it more beneficial for not only the reliability of the power, but also for wildlife, pollinators, and so forth. So here's just kind of a picture of a general area of the right-of-way that we have out there. In here, there's a lot of willow, birch, aspen kind of growing up. And you can see in a lot of areas, these tree species can reach the lines within basically a 5 to 7 year time span versus kind of a managed area. This one, it's kind of grainy and I apologize for that, but this was cut. And then 2 years afterwards, see if you can see my mouse there was a selective herbicide also added in here. So that kind of shows what the end goal is moving into the IVM system. And then here's kind of a big cat excavator. This guy has a Fecon head on it, and then it also can swap out and have like a feller buncher head like the loggers use for taking down some of our larger danger trees. So at this point in time, basically kind of to talk about the tools that we do have. So with mechanical cutting, we have 3 different types of mowers, kind of from down to the small skid steer all the way up to the large cat that you see on the screen right now. We also have chainsaws, bucket trucks, pole trimmers, machines that are called giraffes, which are basically a stationary machine that has a long arm on it with a cutting blade on the end. And by utilizing all these kind of mechanical techniques nowadays versus just kind of a one-off mower, there's safety for the crews that are actually working, less impact on the ground. So kind of, your pounds per square inch that are kind of going on there. But also now adding into the herbicide aspect of it is also taking away the entries and the compaction and the different stuff like that strictly mechanically speaking does. So for our herbicide program, what we had going on was basically an all-terrain vehicle, basically a 6x6 big 4-wheeler with a tank attached to the back of it and a 300-foot hose and sprayer on it. So it could easily kind of guide through different terrains and go through the right of way, and while they can selectively spray what we're after. So our program is in essence going after deciduous species. Aspen, birch, willow would be kind of the biggest ones, is what we're utilizing the herbicide component of this. The IVM plan, what we switched to is a 5-year rotation. So within the entire county, we have 5 different zones. So year number 1, starting back in 2018, was basically our reclamation year. So 100% mechanical, reclaiming the right of way. Some areas had kind of been growing in and didn't have the full right of way, or just had not been hit from years back based on the kind of reactive management. At year number 2, so kind of 2 years after the initial cut, we would go through and do the intermittent herbicide. At year number 5, again, we go back through and reevaluate. And at that point in time for the second cycle, you'll still have a pretty good component of cutting, mainly for the coniferous species that are out there, conifers like your balsam fir, spruce, and that sort of thing. There should at that point in time be a lot less, aspen and birch. We'll evaluate in certain areas if we might come back through at that year number 5 and reapply sporadic herbicide spot spraying versus mechanically mowing. And then the cycle kind of keeps going on, where after that 5 year or the new cycle, we'd come back through 2 years after that cut, apply herbicide again. So by year 3, going to kind of 10 years out there, is when the fruits of our labor really start showing, where we got more of the grasses and the sedges and a lot of the stuff that Dan will have a lot better kind of exact species that we can grow up here and what are kind of native up here. Let's see here. So a lot of the benefits too with the IVM system is that you're kind of continually trying to look at improving the habitat that is out there. So strictly talking about the main right-of-way habitat, so you're 30 or 40 feet. Like I said, we like to keep that basically clear floor to ceiling, looking for low-growing species, pollinator species, that kind of thing. John kind of mentioned before too, now we have a separate habitat when you're talking about kind of your edge trees. When we look at danger trees, sometimes those are with outside of the easement, but they're bigger, larger, dying, decaying, leaning, that sort of thing, trees that could in essence fail and take out the lines. So there are species that go real good on the edge there. Nannyberry, different cherry trees, mountain ash, different species like that we can kind of help promote, plant, or save on the edge there are a lot better to have than, let's say, aspen or birch, for example. That also kind of ties into the different conifer species out there. Your Norway pine, white pine, spruce trees, that would be a lot better species to have there versus a balsam fir. Again, cedar is a great species as it relates to the power line, to have kind of as that edge species. So that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at promoting and what we're looking at while we do our planning and stuff out there. So that kind of comes into where we're not doing the indiscriminate cutting anymore. We're leaving a lot more different species along the edges and then trying to focus on getting a good habitat within the actual easement area that's compatible with the goals of keeping the right of way open for us. So yeah, I think, let me see here. So this is just kind of my contact information, but a few other things that we've been doing. Like I said, this started back in 2017. Arrowhead started talking about it. We started implementing the plan back in 2018. So thus far, we've kind of worked the Gunflint Trail area, which is basically the Lima grade to the very end. We've worked the very western part of the county on Highway 61, moving up to roughly the Lutzen area. And then this year we did Lutzen up to Grand Marais. Next year, our zone is Grand Marais going up to County Road 14 on the east side there. And sorry, I kind of missed there. We had the East County Road 14 up to Grand Portage. That was supposed to be in 2019. But we kind of had some different things going on up on the Gunflint. The reclamation took a little bit longer than we expected. So that area, we've kind of been hot spotting, which is what we're trying to get away from. But it's, like I said, this is still kind of the reclamation first iteration, kind of going through the right of way with this new program and new thought process going into it. I know myself, I've been trying to kind of set up different landowner meetings, lake association meetings. I'm always open for any member to call me up if they have very specific questions about their property and can come out there and we can look at what you have and talk about different options that there might be, or what we would look at from the power company standpoint for removals or trees that would be great to leave there. Or if you have different ideas that you have thoughts about it, that's basically what my job is kind of be that public outreach. I do all the planning for the right-of-way management for Arrowhead, and basically if somebody has a danger tree or just a question, whether it's within cycle or outside of cycle, I'd be the person to contact that. And like I said, can come out there and meet with you and see what we have going on. Some of the different events that we started doing is in the springtime, we're kind of having an annual tree giveaway now. So we'll have basically stuff from Soil and Water from South St. Louis County, I believe that they're coming out of. Different habitats or trees like that. Last year we had, I believe, Nannyberry, sand cherry, and there was one other thing, and we kind of thought about it a little bit too late. So this year we're probably going to try to look into it a little bit earlier and have a little bit different mix, but it's a time that we can come out and, they're great trees to plant within your yard, or like you said, these are great kind of shrub species that are great to plant on the edge of the right of ways. And then just another opportunity that we can kind of talk right of way management with everybody. So yeah, that kind of, I guess, wraps up the majority of what I had to go over. And at any point, type in questions and we can hit them now or hit them at the end. And my information that's up there, email me, call me. I'm always open to talk to people about this stuff. So
Justin, we do have a first question in the chat.
okay.
He wants to know what if they're covered by GM PUC, not Arrowhead? Is there any feedback for them?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yep. What if they're covered by the Grand Marais PUC and not by Arrowhead?
Yes, so that is a completely separate entity. We do have Arrowhead broadband that goes through the city of Grand Marais, but the city utility is who manages that right away. That's outside our purview, basically.
Thank you. And then their follow-up question is probably not directed at you because you aren't in their coverage area, but do you have any feedback for those that are with Arrowhead that don't want herbicides?
Yeah, so we do have an opt-out program. And basically we contact everybody, all the membership prior to doing, mechanical cutting or herbicide. So with the herbicide program, if a person wanted to opt out, there is a charge for that. And that basically offsets the higher cost of having to solely mechanically manage an area. So we do have that program.
Great. And I'm sure we can probably at the discussion part, maybe get into some of the details, because some people in this group might know more about places outside of your area, but somebody wanted to know about Lake County, if you have any information about Lake County.
Yeah, maybe Mike can speak to that. So most of that is Co-op Light and Power. And their system is, I'd say, pretty similar to what we do. But there again, it is I guess, completely different entity in the fact that, we're one of the larger counties out there, but with a smaller membership base. So there's certain things that we inherently have to do differently versus some of the larger co-ops that are out there that, have a lot bigger budgets and a lot more freedom to do different things. So.
Great. Mike, were you going to try to add into that?
You're talking about Kelsey, myself?
Yes, you're unmuted, so I didn't know if you wanted to talk about Lake County.
I just wanted to jump in, Justin, and say a couple of things. I don't know, Justin, if you had a chance this just a couple months ago in September, there was a webinar called Long-Term Effects of Electrical Right-of-Way Vegetation Management on Floral and Faunal Communities. It just means what's the effect on the plants and animals.
Yeah.
And what this research, you did see that, Justin?
I did, but I know what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah, so the results of that showed that this integrated vegetation management that Justin's talking about actually for bird species increases the number and the variety of birds that you have using herbicides. If you use strictly mechanical, it decreases those numbers. So just something to be aware of. It's kind of counterintuitive maybe to some. But the reasons for that, Justin, you did touch on. The mechanical methods often compact the soils. They change the vegetation that tend to grow there, moving it from a more diverse, low-growing plant community to a less diverse plant community. So there's some real reasons and benefits of the IVM that I think I just wanted to jump in.
Would you introduce yourself? Because I think people in this group wouldn't.
Sorry. I'm retired from University of Minnesota Extension. I'm a forester. I've got roughly 45 years experience in forestry. That includes working with utilities in the state of Illinois and other states on exactly integrated vegetation management and working with communities. This is often can be a real contentious, as Justin probably knows, issue, because Justin, as you've gone through this change here, in the last couple of years,
yep.
It's a big change, right away.
Yep.
But as you get into it, and as we get into Dan's talk, I think we'll see some of the benefits. And I will have some other questions for you, Justin, later that are related to how can we work to do more of the long-lived conifer species, and you mentioned them, northern white cedar, white pine, and some of the others, especially on the edges of that right-of-way. We've got lots of landowners in this area that have worked with the North Shore Forest Collaborative for many years, planting white pines. Some of them likely have gotten some into that right-of-way area. And so we may want to talk about what can we do in those cases.
Thank you, Mike. John, did you see that you unmuted and wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just, again, thank you, Mike. I greatly appreciate the perspective. I didn't realize that you worked with electric utilities in the past. That's great to hear. So thank you. It's very topical. There is one more question maybe we could take from Carol Berg before we move on maybe to Dan, and then save additional questions and a lot more time at the end for more of a discussion type approach. But Kelsey, you want to mention Carol's question?
Yes. Are there limitations on herbicide use on the lakeshore right of ways? Could you answer that at all, Justin? And then if we want, we can continue the herbicide conversation later on.
Yes. Sorry about that. I've got a time light in my office here. Yeah, so we, like this last year, the Gunflint area was our first year implementing the herbicide part of the IVM. And we basically chose a wetland variant of that. So the herbicides that we used were Garlon 3A and Polaris. Now we went off the labels on everything. With that mixture, in essence, you could spray right up to, waterways and so forth. Some of that stuff is what the DNR uses actually in lakes, but we kind of put self-imposed buffers. So depending on the lake or, a river, we would be anywhere from, 20 to 50 to 100 feet away from that. And then also working with, the landowners too, if they had special concerns or special areas there. That was kind of the whole point of getting out there and talking to everybody is, one person might be feeling a little bit different than another person on it. And, there's certain areas where it makes sense to use a herbicide. And then there's areas where it just doesn't, be based on different issues like that. So, and if I could just, so I don't forget it, kind of add into something that Mike talked about. I was unable to find the pictures, but I did want to bring up that, yeah, there is a massive amount of people that have been with working with the North Shore Forest Collaborative, specifically around the Lutzen area, the Tofty area. Sugarloaf is a prime example. It was kind of too late in the year to get some kind of good photos of what's going on down there, but there's a lot of areas that kind of what we're talking about and what Arrowhead is trying to move forward with kind of across the board has been actually happening quite a bit. In one example too, and I wish I had these photos, that this year we had an area in the right of way where probably about 500 feet worth of length of it was almost solid milkweed. So we went through there and, sprayed. There's aspen, birch, and willow that were coming up in there. So we did the selective herbicide spraying in there versus a normal year. In the past, that area would have been mowed, sometime during the summer, spring, and in essence would have wrecked the habitat for this year's monarch butterflies. So it was kind of one example when we kind of found that, and just a major benefit, I feel, to the landscape and to something that is kind of all close and dear to all of us up here. So,
great, thank you, Justin. I appreciate your presentation, and hang tight. There'll be plenty more conversation, I know, on this very important subject for everybody here. When we spoke on the phone initially with Molly, we thought we really need to see, what can landowners do? What makes sense to plant? What are some perhaps innovative ideas? I immediately thought of Dan Schutte from Shoreview Natives as a natural go-to person for his expertise on this sort of subject. However, he hasn't seen your presentation, so this I know we're catching him a little bit flat-footed on what's being undertaken by Arrowhead Electric, but I know Dan is very nimble and is well versed in this subject matter. So with that, I'd like to introduce again Dan Schutte. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks everybody for taking part in this. And Justin, good to see you again. Justin, I go back to Lake County Forestry days. I worked just a little bit of my background. I worked with the Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District for about 4 years. And my background is more in education. I actually had Justin's daughter in my class at North Shore Community School. So I think it's really cool to see what Arrowhead's doing with this. And like John said, I hadn't seen any of Justin's. I really didn't have a lot of background on what they're doing, but I can speak to a few things for sure from a vegetation management standpoint that sounded really, really good. I don't think you can I work with square footage and linear footage a lot with projects. And so when you start putting mileage out there on the lines and the right of way, you don't want to underestimate just what a task it is to manage that much vegetation across that large of an area. So, there's a lot of different utility approaches, I think, to managing right of ways, whether it's a railroad or a gas line. And it sounds like, it's nice to have people like Justin and companies like Arrowhead that are thinking differently about how that can be done. My background is, for the last decade or so has been a lot in vegetation, native vegetation, and we've had we've worked with a lot of different plants in a lot of different areas, which one of the coolest things I've found is just the different characteristics of individual plants. And Justin alluded to a lot of that too. What's good on the edge as far as the white, the long-lived conifers for white pine and cedar. Cedar seems like when you're talking about that, I thought my presentation is definitely geared more, and it's not much of a presentation. I've got a few slides here, just a few thoughts and a few example plants that seem like they'd work in some of these areas. But a lot of it is a lot of folks on this presentation know it just boils down to basic plant biology. Is what's there for light? Can you grow this plant that needs the light? Can you block out light from other plants that you don't want to grow? And so Justin, when you're talking about the cedar and kind of that coniferous edge there, it's just from biological standpoint, it's just nice to block the light out and kind of take up that space with big bulky trees. And then you've got, from a management standpoint, it seems like you've got a narrower corridor, and, Justin put all the kind of the footages out there that you then have to deal with. So I guess that's more what my, few slides here. Maybe I'll just start with that. Maybe I'll share my screen here and just start cruising through some of this stuff. I think a lot of, as I'm doing this, I'll just say, I think a lot of what, a lot of the difficulties in managing different things that are happening on a right of way, different sorts of vegetation, different topography, that's all, that all factors into what sort of plants can grow there too. Whenever we do projects, we really try to, a big thing that I talk about with folks is just trying to optimize conditions for the plants that you're putting in there. So, you go across landscape for 500 and some odd miles, like Justin was saying, and you're going to encounter just about everything. And so it's nice, like you guys are already doing, to have a lot of tools in the box. And I guess from my standpoint, I look at it the same way, as far as, you'd have to have a kind of a tailored approach to what's going in there, because you wouldn't want to throw a plant in a place that isn't optimized for those conditions. And I guess that's what, I guess that's more my area expertise, is knowing what a lot of these, definitely the herbaceous wildflowers, and then some of the shrubs, what's their optimum conditions? How are you going to get something there that not only is going to thrive, but, say you've got 100 species out there that you could plant in a place. A lot of times I boil that down to what are the goals for the site. In this case, for right-of-way management, you don't want invasive, you want something robust and aggressive from a native plant standpoint. I think, a lot of times on road and culvert projects, you see the introduction of invasive species, which is its own little animal to manage. And thankfully, you don't have this going on, where you don't have a really aggressive invasive species. And what I would think most of the right of way, I'm sure things are showing up, tansy's showing up, reed canary grass is showing up, but by and large, you're not importing a lot of aggregate that's going to bring in those super nasty seeds. And so mainly you're kind of, from a vegetation establishment standpoint, to me, it seems like you're kind of pitting native plants against native plants for the most part. And so when you think about that, it kind of boils down, you look at the site conditions, and then what sort of aggressive native plant might thrive in those conditions. And then you factor in the goals, it's got to be short. It's got to, if it's a shrub, it can't top out over 8 or 10 feet, even in the long term. So I guess those are some of like the input channels that I think about after hearing Justin's and thinking more critically about, right of way. But I think it's doable. And that's kind of, as I thought about this, I put this picture of the butterfly up there. I'm a big pollinator guy. A lot of what I do is focused on providing pollinator habitat. And that's the cool thing about native plants, is like Justin speaking at it from a vegetation management standpoint for Arrowhead Electric. But the cool things about these native plants, especially the flowering perennials, is that they've got a lot of this other benefit going on with them. There's a big stormwater thing, rain gardens, buffers, those are all native plants, but it's tied more directly to that stormwater and erosion control standpoint. The pollinator conversation, obviously, like I just mentioned, that's huge for me. And so the idea that you could take, this disturbed real estate that's now, compared to a intact boreal forest, it does have this corridor down it, but it lets in more light. So if you're going to do something to optimize that ecologically, it's, you get that edge effect immediately for the wildlife and the birds. But to me, if you can fill that up with a bunch of flowering perennials, you get this kind of secondary benefit with the pollinators, which, maybe that's a primary benefit depending on who you are, but it doesn't hurt any of us for sure. The chemical thing isn't as much here. And it's just fun to look at. It's fun to see flowering landscapes. That's why I do what I do. And it's, these right of ways run through private land. And a lot of times, it's an open walking trail for a landowner. And so the idea that you could integrate some of this into the daily, hike or whatever for those folks is, exciting to me, I would think. And we're in a great place. Minnesota's a great place for native plant conversations and doing stuff like this. I just mentioned, I'm a big proponent of addressing invasive species, and Justin can definitely speak more to how much of this, like I said, I'm sure you come across invasive species within the right of way. And that's kind of its own little animal. If you're trying to replace those with native species, there's definitely some management. It takes herbicide a lot of the times. Nobody likes herbicide. I mean, nobody on this call likes herbicide, right? But I think the fact of the matter is, when you're looking at scale and economics, it's a tool that hopefully provides the means to a better end in the landscape if it's used judiciously. So, these are more common ones for up here. I'm sure you see spotted knapweed and tansy and spurge in the right of way at times. And it sounds like your approach probably calls for, herbicide application in those situations, which again means to an end. If you can get ahead of that, and if there's that next step of putting in a native species that's optimized for that site, then all the better if you can get it there and have it be aggressive and, get a seed bank on the landscape so that can continue. I'm obviously buckthorn scares me. I have it on my land. There's stands up by Beaver Bay, and it can grow in the middle of the forest. That's obviously a concern. Everybody's familiar with that. And then this Japanese barberry thing seems like another threat in our area. And I don't know if these two specifically are present on the right of way that Justin deals with, but that barberry is a nasty one. I'm sure, from my soil and water days when we were trying to optimize grant funds, it's like, okay, if you guys are going in the right of way, to me, it makes, I think about ed maps and, just the knowledge of where these things are to put it out there for other people. So I guess I put this slide in there, like, just as a reminder, I guess, to all of us that when you find some of these invasive species, whether you're Arrowhead forester, whether you're a landowner, it's really beneficial to put them out there on a system like ed maps that all the, state, federal, locals tie into in their management plans for this stuff. So I don't need to dwell on that because, we're looking more at other things. The other cool thing from a organizational standpoint is when you're starting to put native plants out there, whether it's an early flowering shrub that's particularly good for pollinators or, mid and late season forage for pollinators and some of those native plants. It's it's just a cool story to tell, especially when it's done on that much of a landscape. I mean, I don't think you want to discount the impact that, putting, potentially 20 miles of common milkweed out there. You said that big stand of common milkweed, and that's a big deal. One thing we've noticed more recently with the milkweed is that, when what we've seen, and I can give my theory on that. People in this audience likely know more about it than I do, but when you plant milkweed as a standalone stand, the monarch butterflies, and I haven't seen on those huge stands of milkweed, I usually don't see it being mobbed with monarch larvae, but when I see it in a mixed stand with a lot of other flowering plants, I do see all the milkweed getting eaten out of those stands, to where it's like, geez, why couldn't these find the huge stand? And my thought is, you put the forage there for the butterflies, and that's initially what they come for, is because they got to eat, X amount of times a day. And so they're first going to that forage. And then when the milkweed's there, they lay their eggs at the same time. So you wind up with a bigger density of monarch butterflies in these mixed floral patches than you do in these big monoculture common milkweed stands, which I just think is interesting, but it speaks to, I don't know, diversity breeds stability, right? So I think the more of that diverse landscape that you can get in these right of ways, probably the better ecologically, and from a habitat perspective, it's going to be for, the birds and the bees. So, I just kept this in there. Obviously, before, if you were thinking about putting things in there, you want to have a pretty good idea about what you're going to do, what sort of native plants you're going to do. Is the site prepped? Are you sure there's not reed canary grass there? So from a landowner perspective, as you're working with individuals that want to enhance or, help be a partner to Arrowhead in that sense of helping to manage that right of way judiciously and responsibly, then, there's a little bit of education with those landowners that would probably have to happen just to make sure that they've got the right tools and kind of the right lens on when they're looking at their stuff. So just a quick list. I've got these all kind of itemized here. And a few that aren't in here that Justin, you mentioned that I should probably put in here, some of those sedges, and that kind of, I started talking about all those different conditions you're going to see along the right of way. And I'm kind of a stickler for making sure the plants are matched to the conditions in the project that we do. And so, in those wetter, low areas, you mentioned some of those sedges, and, if you've got 40 different sedges in northern Minnesota, a brown fox sedge and a broom sedge are just really aggressive to the point where they mat down and they keep other things out of there, which might not always be desirable, but, in a right of way, there's another plant, this cup plant coming up, I'll talk about in the same sort of context. It's like, it can be really aggressive, but it's way better than tansy, right? Or something that's not native to the area. So I'll just go through these. A lot of people are probably familiar with a lot of these, but these are things that we've seen do really good in like a variety of conditions. I'm a firm believer now with these wildflowers that it's much more the sunlight that matters to their growth than it is really the moisture conditions. It seems like they can all take a variety of soils, but the more sun they get, just the better they grow. Canada goldenrod, everybody knows that one, spreads like crazy, and I'm assuming there's a ton of that in the right of way anyway, because it's kind of, the seed bank's kind of ubiquitous across Northeast Minnesota. So a few more of these, these are things where the seed bank, like Canada goldenrod, you see everywhere. Bee balm, you see kind of along the wayside rest areas. You're going to Graham Ray, there's some in the ditch, which might be a remnant of a MnDOT planting, actually, is my gut feeling on that. But I mean, bee balm's an aggressive plant that once you get it in a site, it just keeps going, both by rhizomes and like really heavy seeding. And I guess I'll reference when I was with the Soil and Water, there was a project done up on the Beaver River, and part of that project was abandoning the channel and rechannelizing the river. But that abandoned oxbow, we wound up putting in a bunch of with the idea of getting a seed bank on site. We put in a bunch of aggressive native perennials that again were optimized for kind of a mesic, kind of damp, abandoned channel type thing. So we put in bone set and those sedges. with the idea that you don't have to plant the whole thing, right? Because it'd be enormously expensive. But if you just get some of these plants in there that seed out really heavy, and then you play the long game and manage, make sure they've got what they need as far as space and resources. And by that, I mean, controlling other things if you need to, or managing the other vegetation. It's a really cheap way to, set yourself up for 10 years down the road where you've got a lot of these plants on there. So on the landscape. So bee balm's a great one for that. New England Aster, everybody loves it. Late bloomer, great late season forage for both monarch butterflies and honeybees. And it grows by rhizomes. I mean, I grow these things from seed, of course, but I see them in their 6-pack, and we're always fussing with things in the 6-pack and taking them out. And these things just push out rhizomes in a really big way. It winds up forming a huge root mass. Cup plant, I mean, there's a spectrum that people sit on as far as, how native is a native species. Personally, and I guess, from a business standpoint, I always feel we got bigger fish to fry, and there's a lot of this climate assisted migration that makes us look at species that are slightly more southern and maybe bumping those up, a few degrees latitude to the north, just to get something on the landscape that might do well with an increased warming on the landscape. So, this cup plant, it's a really aggressive plant, but it's really cool plant. Stature wise, it's cool. It's huge. Flower wise, it's beautiful, and it sets up monstrous stands of itself when the conditions are right. So it's native. There's native records in Pine County, Minnesota, Douglas County, Wisconsin, and that's all I'll say about how close it is. But it's a really aggressive plant, which again might be. If you get this established, it might be preferential to some people than having to treat something else with herbicide down the road. So Maximilian Sunflower, another awesome flower, spreads like crazy. This is likely in the right of way already. But again, just like things that if we're in a site where there's been tansy historically, we treat it, we smother it with black plastic, we dig it out, but there's still a remnant seed bank. And these plants that I'm mentioning are things that we've seen like outcompete the tansy. It's just a bigger statured plant that outgrows it and gets bigger and seeds down where it used to be. Pearly everlasting, it's an awesome plant in a garden setting. This stuff rhizomes out incredibly well, and you see that in the stands like this. They can develop themselves. Just big colonizer. Stiff goldenrod's a great plant. It's all over up here. Pound for pound, probably one of the best goldenrods for pollinator species services. So diversity and just numbers of pollinators that visit that. Larry Weber wrote a book about goldenrod up here, and this is the one he cites as being, the most visited by pollinators, and it's aggressive. There's a common milkweed stand, probably about like what Justin was talking about, but really cool. It's the only, if there's 31 species of milkweed in North America, this is the only colonizing species that spreads through rhizome really aggressively. And so, that's a fun little characteristic of that plant to know about, that it can set up really dense things like that. That gray-headed coneflower is a nice flower too. Again, just aggressive. It gets big, bulky, muscles other things out. And this mountain mint's another cool one. Stays a little lower, but also it doesn't spread laterally like a mint. It goes more vertically and does a really good job with pollinators too. And then from a grasses standpoint, again, dry areas, big blue stem. I see it more and more every year on Highway 61. There's more big blue stem. I feel like that's probably some sort of reflection of climate change, but those stands just keep getting bigger and more robust. And, it seems like that's a good one as well from a perennial standpoint. And then shrubs, just that we've had, success with. Deer resistance is obviously a concern. You're not going to be out there managing these things, but those top ones, 9-bark is all over the place up here and seems like it does really well, spreads well. Indigo bush, that Amorpha fruticose is the genus and species on that. Dogwood, I know that stuff gets eaten by deer, but it's just sorry, you guys might hear my kids screaming in the background here. Hey, Kristen, can we shut the screaming down a little bit? Sorry. Dogwood, Nannyberry, Justin mentioned that one as well. Awesome plant. And then, these other ones down here, Elderberry, Serviceberry, Meadow Sweet's good for wetter areas and seems to grow, grow pretty well up here. So, I mean, those are just some of the shrubs that I guess I would look at. There's this weed suppression mat. I use this on a lot of our projects. We use this on that Beaver River project in the abandoned stream channel just to suppress, just to get that seed bank idea a head start, so you're going to get the desirable perennials out there, make sure that your seed plot doesn't get overtaken by whatever else is in the area. And that's a biodegradable product. It worked really well, just making sure that all the perennials that we wanted out there putting seeds out thrived. And so, that's what it looked like. We planted in June. There it is by July. There it is in August. It's pretty good growth on those. Just a second, I'm taking in. This is probably an antiquated slide maybe. So Golden Alexander, just a few more. There's that bee balm again. Hyssop, that's another one, wasn't on the list actually. Spreads really well. It's a really nice plant actually. Stiff goldenrod again. Yeah, I think that's about all I had. It's a big effort that you guys are going. I mean, it seems like you've got you've got a rotation schedule of 5 years, different geographic locations. But, I guess I really believe in those aggressive native plants. I'm a huge fan of taking out invasive species. Tansy is a particular concern of mine. Then I mentioned the buckthorn and barberry, but then just the idea that if you get it out of there, you don't want to come back every year. And in the same sense, if you're managing a right away, you don't want to come back every year. Just get a really dialed in plant suite in there where you want it, and then play the long game. And it seems like you could really set up a cool assemblage of plants in a right away. With that sort of management that just it takes to get started. So that's about all I had, I guess, from my standpoint. I'm happy to answer questions, and we're easy to find. I love talking about this stuff. I think it's cool that other people are working really diligently on native plants in general in our area. So I'm definitely, all in for chatting about this or help, doing whatever we can to help the effort.
Thanks, Dan.
Maybe just chime in real quick here too, just to add that I didn't really bring it up before, but how Dan mentioned the climate change and invasive species. Just with my background and forestry knowledge and this and that is a big issue for a multitude of reasons. The forest tree species are changing because of that. The invasive species is a huge one. I know knapweed and tansy, I would say, are probably two of the worst ones that I do find out on the right of way. And Dan could probably speak a little bit more in depth into this too, but those species, they deplete the resources that are out there. Water retention versus native plant species, the benefit of promoting the native plant groups out there, they don't cost us anything more, but the benefits are so huge for a slew of reasons: wildlife, the birds, the pollinators, and all that kind of stuff. So in essence, there's no reason not to promote those kind of habitats, but there's so much benefit to do it. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, that's kind of a big thing that's on my mind and our mind here too, is that, climate change and all that brings with it is, we have to react differently moving forward here.
Justin, this is John. Just a question, because I know you're going to get a number of questions related to herbicides. Can you just talk a little bit about the science behind the herbicides, the history a little bit, maybe, and how might what we're hearing tonight about native plants, how might those plants work in and amongst areas that herbicide might be applied, and how might herbicides avoid certain types of plants and affect others?
Okay, yeah. So on that token, a lot of herbicides nowadays have been in use for quite a few years. They're kind of scientifically created to affect certain species and not other species. So kind of going back to, kind of a higher level, generally speaking, the Garland 3A and the Polaris, we chose that based on the safety of use around water and aquatic areas and so forth, while also reaching the goal of killing back, the deciduous tree species. So your birch, your aspen, willow, that sort of thing, while also not affecting the conifer species, not affecting the grasses, the sedges, the shrubs, and that sort of thing. And then also by applying it, very pointedly out there. So it's a select spray. It's not a broadcast spray across the landscape. It's spraying those targeted species that we're looking at. And then there again, an off species, let's say there's a spruce tree right next to that birch tree. The chemical makeup is that those herbicides don't affect the spruce tree. They only affect the birch tree. So that kind of goes into our decision. And then, as John said, so we're kind of taking out the undesirable species while promoting the ones that we want. And as it comes to kind of the invasive species right now, our main goal is to work at the deciduous stuff, and that mix that we used last year, it actually wouldn't be the best for the invasive control. I believe that, at best we might have 80% kill if we were to actually spray, let's say tansy for an example. So, the future thought as time goes on is to see what different mixes are out there that might achieve more goals. I know I was heavily involved in the invasive species team when I worked for Lake County and worked with Dan quite a bit on that. And then through Cook County up here, I've been in talks with the feds and with the county and with their programs, and kind of, throwing it out there that I do spend a lot of time on the landscape so I can see different areas and see where pockets of stuff are kind of growing up. So there's kind of that collaboration too of working with different agencies, so that we can all kind of get back to a good native mixture that's out there, and which is beneficial across the board. Does that kind of answer what you were thinking there, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks a lot. It provides some context of what these herbicides are and how they work. First of all, I want to thank Dan again for your presentation, and I know there'll be a lot of interaction going forward here in tonight's event, but just want to say thank you for that, for putting it together. I think it's we picked two great presenters.
Absolutely.
So,
and Dan, it looks like we do have some questions. So can I read some off to you? Thumbs up.
Yep.
Awesome. How about blueberries and thimbleberries for cover? What's the feedback on that as an idea?
Yeah. I mean, I think it'd be a cool idea again in the right places. Those thimbleberries, I don't know other people's experience in transplanting those. I've heard they're fussy from cultivars. And just again, the scale of what we're talking about, just some of that's going to be economics. From a landowner perspective, though, I think it's great. I mean, if you've got a south facing kind of rocky slope with acidic soil, put some blueberries in there. I think, all those, my little presentation was not comprehensive by any means on what could be planted out there, but I think that, the idea holds true, just making sure you've got an optimized species for the area, and all the better if it's aggressive and you can kind of let it go long-term and it'll succeed. That reed canary grass, hey BJ and John, the reed canary grass is a difficult animal. I saw that pop up, and I looked at Bowser, the Board of Water and Soil Resources webpage. They have, they've got the chemical or herbicide regimes and best practices for that, best time of the year, best stature of the plant to use it at. There was, it's just really difficult. It's such an aggressive plant. We've used black plastic successfully on it. It takes a while. It takes 2 years, but if you've got a limited patch that came in with a culvert gravel or, the French drain or whatever, if it's a discrete patch, I think that black plastic isn't a bad idea. There's a cool process down in Anoka County, Ramsey County area, where a guy made this device for a skid steer that basically just dethatches the top 6 inches of soil. He's doing a large scale, 50 acres, 100 acres of overgrown wetland. and then he piles it up and burns it, which is, I mean, and what he said is once you get that stuff off, the native seed bank comes in and it's like some glorious, sedge meadow, just by running that skid steer over it. But that's not up here. And I think it takes pretty special circumstances to make that work really good. I think you need extra soil there, and you don't want to be doing it in rocky areas, I don't think, with that machine. So I don't know. I mean, the reed canary grass is a tough one of the worst. So I guess I don't have anything definitive. Somebody else might have more experience than me on reed canary grass specifically, though. So I guess I'd open it up to other folks.
Dan, I'd like to jump in a little bit on reed canary, and this really goes to what you've been doing. It's the long game I see with reed canary, but it's also when we look at invasives, we need to look at how do they interact with the other plants around them, and what plants tend to kind of push things like reed canary out. The only one that I've seen push it out is tansy. Tansy actually works really well on pushing reed canary out, and tansy's a lot easier to take care of later.
Yeah.
I'm not promoting planting of tansy, but I've observed it, and it worked very well over a 7-year period on the ditch outside my house. I no longer have reed canary. I got tansy. I no longer have tansy. I now have goldenrod, red osier dogwood, and raspberries.
Yeah, I agree, the lesser of evils, right? And that cup plant, I don't start that stuff from seed anymore, but that to me, if a Canada goldenrod will go somewhere, I saw that comment by Molly too. Goldenrod's an impressive plant, taking over, growing in and taking over a bunch of stuff. And in Molly's experience, reed canary, that cup plant, it thrives in wet environments and it just forms a massive dense canopy. And I wonder, just pitting those, like having that be your tansy might be, a bump above on the quality scale just to have that on the landscape. But none of it happens fast. So you're right in the long game attitude towards it, but it's probably worth it.
That has all the questions that we have in the chat. John, do we want to open this up to some conversation, or would you like to finish up with some thoughts?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't want to put Wayne Russ on the spot, but Wayne is a founder of the North Shore Forest Collaborative, and we've invited him here as well. I'd love to hear if he has any thoughts regarding what he's hearing tonight. So Wayne, if you want to put yourself or take yourself off mute and be willing to share. Otherwise, if you nod and shake your head no, then we'll move on.
Well, there are lots of things to talk about, and I'm encouraged by the sort of the approach that Justin's talking about in being more specific on how to attack. I remember many years ago discussing this or learning about it or reading about it, managing power lines, and even in discussing it with Arrowhead Electric many moons ago. It was more of a, back then, decades ago, it was more of a get in and cut it as best you can. And my discussions, I would try to promote the idea of a U-shape sort of, if you were looking at it in cross section, it would be a U-shaped sense of vegetation and growth. And that's exactly what Justin, you're describing. And that wasn't something that went over very big then, and I'm hoping it goes over now. But I'm thinking that you need to actually, if you can, I think expand on it to some degree. Going beyond the edge of what you talk about, and maybe it has to do with getting permission from the landowner or whatever, because you have a right of way, I suppose, that's limited. But if you were to set up for a U-shaped profile and start in with shrubs In fact, I don't know why you're not talking about shrubs under your lines, because so many of these shrubs like willow and hazel and so on aren't something that grows up to your lines, except in perhaps maybe you're talking about how to access lines. Maybe that's a lot of it. But, if you work from shrubs, or even if you work from your flower sort of state up through shrubs and into the small trees, like I think you were talking about, Justin, I think Dan actually mentioned too, but if you get into some, your Juneberries and cherries and mountain ash and crataegus and that kind of thing on the edges, and then blend it in with something like the shorter growing, perhaps cedar, you're really developing a wonderful setup, because it's not only a sort of protection for the line, but you're developing a better habitat for wildlife there. You're developing a transitional zone, and that has been shown in research to be a richer area for wildlife to be in. It's a heavier screen for certain animals, and it's a heavier production area for others. And it's, it provides a way for certain birds, for example, to just migrate with some safety below, and that kind of thing. Is many approaches to looking at that. But if you could, I would think it would be good if you expanded the edges a little. And a lot of your lines are actually too short, too narrow to do too much with some of this that we've even talked about. So, to the degree you can, I would think that would be great. I'm a little bit concerned about the native quote unquote species, that some of those that Dan is talking about many of these that are really not native to the immediate area, and yet are aggressive. I can see that there's certainly benefits, and I also see the need to be considering climate change and how some of these species should be brought in anyway to help, sort of maintain their availability in the natural world. So I'm just stating that a lot of the promotion of these further southern species is in the works in terms of testing and planning and that kind of thing, for sure, by several agencies. And I think the North Shore Forest Collaborative is going to have a little bit different statement in their suggestions as to how to and what to plant because of climate change. So I'm not sort of against it. I'm just saying that many of these things aren't necessarily true native. I saw the list that was from southern St. Louis County that was sent out by the county last year. There are at least 30 that aren't really native to the area on there, called native, but they're only, further south. So, that's my perspective. It isn't like I have a lot of weight there. I think a lot of people are anxious to throw a lot of those pretty flowers out and see them grow. So it's, there's a lot of draw there. And there's also, like you're saying, quite a bit of wildlife insect benefit. My concern is how aggressive are they? If they come into an area that's new and they can even some of them outcompete some of these really aggressive ones we have here now, where does it stop? So I don't have the answers to that necessarily, but that's a concern I have. I guess I would stop there, because there are a lot of things I could talk about and would love to talk about, and maybe some of it will come up with other questions.
Wonderful. Well, we have a question in our chat, and I'll read that off. And I guess I'm going to give that to whoever, if Dan or Justin or John that feels best to address it. Somebody's asking, I'm wondering about row adjacents to the county rows and coordinations of management. Near our place in Cook County, we have lupin, tansy, and some reed canary grass in the ditch, and then this moving below the power lines. I'm wondering about migration from ditches to the power line row if there's not coordination.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit on that. There is beginning to be more and more coordination as time goes on. But that is a very specific problem of what you just said there. So the county highway and, whether it's a state or county, kind of has their objectives. when they have to step in and do different stuff. So some of that is pretty much outside of our realm. But there again, when you're talking the actual road right of ways, the county, the state, and the feds do have invasive programs going where they're starting to, really kind of buckle down on that and look more into it. So there's different programs that are happening to address that. But yeah, it's definitely a concern about, if we were to mow the right of way, and then, highway comes through and mows the ditch and spreads the seeds, it happens.
Thanks, Justin. And then maybe this one's for you, Dan. Are there any sources of beaked hazelnut for edge of rows?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a cool plant. I do not deal with beaked hazelnut, although I'd love to. The school my son goes to has a big stand of it right off of 61, and just a cool plant. I mean, every animal in the world wants a hazelnut. It's from what I saw this fall in that stand, everything was in there. And it seemed like it'd be a good one. Short height, tops out short, and good for shadier areas. But I prairie restorations, Minnesota native landscapes are the first two that immediately come to mind that would probably have some of that, but that's all I know.
I have a question I'd like to pose to maybe one or two of our presenters today, and maybe Mike Reichenbach is a good source to start with if you're on, Mike. We have 43 attendees tonight, which is great, and welcome everybody. Really, we probably follow a full spectrum of scale and abilities on individuals' private property. How might somebody want to approach this from a practical standpoint on their property? And where do you think you would begin? Mike, would you like to try to field that type of question?
Yeah, well, I think that funnels into the final question I put into the chat for everyone. Some things to ponder. I think where I'd start with this is moving forward. How do we have this type of discussion on an ongoing basis? Justin's got not only 300 miles of ground line. I've got that number right, Justin. Right of ways to deal with, but this crosses many landowners' properties. And so how do you work with them from an educational basis, not just to say here's what we're doing and why, but here's how we move the landscape of the North Shore forward, maybe toward what the North Shore Forest Collaborative is hoping to see. How do we begin to work together? How do we work with Dan and some of the other businesses out there to make all of these parts and pieces work? So, John, what are the steps that we take? I would say, Justin, are you available to, do this on an ongoing basis occasionally? Maybe be more involved in the North Shore Forest Collaborative. When I've walked with landowners who've had recent line clearing under the lines, how do we prepare landowners for what it'll look like immediately, but also for what the end goal is of this integrated vegetation management, and how can we do that together? So kind of a win-win. So Justin, we help you do some of the work you need to do, but we also get the objectives of landowners involved, so that if they don't want herbicide, how can we, rather than just charging them a fee, help them know what plants we need to work against, those taller ones that are directly under the line, and what not to plant there. This also leads to some questions I had. Some utility companies have removal replacement programs for certain trees. What options are there for that? I know a lot of landowners I've talked to talk about, wow, I got these northern white cedar under the right of way over, like 3 miles down the road. How can we facilitate things like that happening by working together? Some real constructive stuff. So, John, I don't know if I answered your question, but this is the type of conversation that I think needs to be ongoing rather than just a point in time.
Mike, yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I was getting more towards a sort of a practical on the ground look at individual circumstances, but you're posing great questions. I saw Justin nod his head as far as his involvement with North Shore Forest Collaborative. So we have an open door policy when it comes to the North Shore Forest Collaborative, whether it's Arrowhead Electric or anybody else on this Zoom call. So, but yeah, I'm trying to get sort of at the question of how would an individual landowner begin square one? Who do they talk to? How do they get started?
Yeah, so to kind of, I guess to answer a few things or maybe jump around a little bit, but yeah, that's a great comment. And, you know, even though we started back in 2017 and we're now at 2021, you know, a lot of this is new territory. These educational seminars, I know I've been reaching out to different people to try to have more of them. You know, we have our tree giveaways, we have our customer appreciation events where, you know, I try to throw out a lot of this information, but yeah, basically trying to look at getting different avenues to get more people kind of involved with this. Now, a big part of that is during the planning phases, whether it's herbicide or mechanical, but during the planning management of the right of way, you know, I try to reach out to people. Sometimes, you know, I can't track everyone down personally. You know, we leave door knockers. If there's something pretty major going on at the property, then I'll, you know, go and, you know, make the phone calls regardless of their seasonal or full-time residents. But yeah, I mean, I'm always here to have anybody reach out to, and that's kind of a big thing. Like I stated in the very beginning is that, you know, my job is a lot of it's just customer service to explain what our goals are, but then also to look at each individual parcel that's out there to let them know, this is what you have, this would be great, this is what we can promote. Because on that same token, we can't look at a parcel that's right on Lake Superior here in Lutzen the same way we look at a parcel that's up on the Gunflint. So that all kind of comes into effect there where, like I said, it's kind of can meet with people individually. I meet with a lot of associations too, you know, when they reach out or, so I hope that kind of answers it or covers what we're thinking.
Yeah,
there.
and when you, let's say you meet a given landowner on site and they kind of give you a rough idea what they're hoping to achieve. Do you then sort of map out for them within your system what they're looking for, point them in the right direction towards resources? How does that play out?
Yep. I guess each individual meeting is different. If they have specific questions like that, I can definitely work with them. You know, different contacts that I have, whether it be, you know, soil and water or, you know, like Dan or stuff like that, kind of push them in those directions. If, you know, they have more specific questions about plants or implementing different things. You know, a big point of what you brought up too is that my background in GIS is that we're basically starting a lot of internal in-house creation of this for our management planning and to also get a historic look on what's out there. So that's kind of just it. If there's a, you know, a special stand or a plant or something like that, that can be incorporated within our GIS layers, that not only can we talk about with the landowners, we have it on file, and then it's something that our contractors also have access to for areas of concern. So it's kind of a ever evolving and moving forward system at this point in time.
Great, thank you. Kelsey, looks like we have a few more questions in the chat.
Yeah, we're starting to pile up. Thank you very much though, Justin. That was very helpful. And I think good for us to all learn about how we could even just start the process. That is hard to even know where to start sometimes.
Yep.
Hopefully Dan can maybe toss in a little bit about that too, about what he would recommend for maybe a starting point after I ask him some questions. But Justin, how are you implementing the IVM to the entire network of power lines or by requesting of landowners? And is there an added cost?
So there is absolutely no added cost whatsoever from going from a traditional mowing standpoint to the IVM. The added cost that we have brought up is deals with our herbicide program if somebody would like to opt out on that. But otherwise, you know, what we're doing out there, you know, that's just part of your monthly bill that you pay, you know, buying electricity from us being a member. So yeah, there is no added expense for moving into this system. Like I said, the entire network at this point in time, we've basically broke it down into 5 different zones. So we've in essence, fully worked 3 out of the 5 right now, and then pieces of the other ones. So within the next couple of years, we'll basically have made one entire mechanical work through. So we've had one spray year yet. So in basically 4 years from now, we'll have one entire rotation that includes one mechanical entry and one herbicide entry at that point in time. And then, 15 years down the road there, even 10 years down the road, after we get the cycles kind of moving through there, is when a lot of these benefits really start popping up and really start showing up and what we're trying to achieve here.
Wonderful. And then Dan, I wanted to toss it back to you. So somebody calls you tomorrow and says, I'm looking at doing something. What's the next steps with you for working with them?
Yeah, I mean, usually the first thing I do with a site visit, no matter what we're trying to do, is just, look at what's there. I guess with any project like this, just because there's a spectrum of comfort with, the physical work that planting a tree takes. I mean, there's just so much involved with, finding the plants and planting. I guess I would start with the low hanging fruit, like try to find, I think I hear what Wayne was saying about, you question some of the really aggressive species, and you want to make sure you're not going to do anything wrong. But I think there's some just really like a pearly everlasting. It's everywhere up here. It is aggressive. So if you have some soil where there's not a lot of competition or some sort of disturbance went on there, maybe just start with that. Maybe there's kind of a triage of how much energy it takes to engage at different points. If you've got the resources to get white cedar on the edge of the right of way, that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess it comes down to how much time and energy and resources people have as individuals to where they could plug in. But I'd say start with the low hanging fruit. I mean, I like the aggressive native species, and I think the shrubs hold a lot. I tell you, that South St. Louis Soil and Water Conservation District, again, I hear what Wayne was saying about some of those species, but it's economical, it's fun, it's a good time of the year when they come in. And I'm a huge fan of early flowering shrubs on the landscape in general. And if there was a handful that people could just start trying in that right of way. And again, I don't know when that maintenance schedule comes, it'd be nice to know if there was a standard way. It's like, okay, Joe Blow put in 10 elderberry shrubs over there, make sure you don't mow them or make sure they don't get sprayed, just some sort of, because that'd be the bad deal, is the landowner trying to do something and then it wasn't in that right rotation of the schedule and somebody came through with herbicide and blasted it, then landowners got money in it, and if there wasn't communication or that stuff gets fussy all the time. So I guess maybe between the landowners that are trying to do things on their own, Arrowhead, some sort of just a flag system, or like, hey, this means I did something here, pay attention or watch out, type thing. But but get some native perennial wildflower plugs, I think, be my best suggestion.
And to tack on to what Dan just said too, that's part of our planning process, specifically when we're talking herbicide. We won't ever enter anyone's private property and spray herbicide without, their 100% knowledge of what's going on. And part of that planning process to see is there are certain plants that you do have out there. There's certain things like that. So we can flag it off. We can go around them. We can, make sure that we protect those kind of areas like that. So that's a big part of the planning process, specifically with the herbicide too.
And I guess that for people that are, on this call and thinking about doing so, like, oh, what can I do? I mean, I wouldn't underestimate, like, the best time to plant a tree was tomorrow, and the same with the bush, and really the same with this. It's amazing. Like, once you do engage and get something in the ground, it's just a cool process to watch happen. And, a lot of times I feel like as a society, we don't know where to play, like, oh, here we are at home, and like, how can I help the environment or something? It's just such an easy plug-in point. Especially when you got an advocate for the people that are managing the land, like Justin's saying, it's, just taking the first step, whatever that first step might be in your case, whether it's putting in a flower or putting in a shrub, especially if the communication's there to make sure, it doesn't go unnoticed or uncared for. I'd say anything in that direction. And like, there's a lot of resources. So if you still got questions after this, call Justin or give me a jingle, or Wayne or Mike or John or somebody. And it's like, oh, somebody could probably do a site visit or give you another nickel's worth of their thoughts on what your particular best move would be. But yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I would definitely say always, reach out. Just with this call here, this all got started because of past relationships. Going back to 2008, when I kind of met Dan and met Molly, and even working with other partner organizations up here, that I wouldn't think in a million years today in my job role that we could have something like this. But it's just a continual collaboration between kind of everybody up here, and a lot of us knowing each other and having the resources that if I don't have the answer, I probably know who to, send you to that does. So,
Yeah.
Great. Well, we have some more questions there, and you guys are asking some great things. So hopefully we can go on to the next question. Hold on one second.
So I was reading some of them. Yeah, I can go through. Jeff had the one about beyond clearing for maintenance, can there be anything done with the buried cable? And in essence, like we started with, that's a 15-foot right away versus 30 or 40 foot with the above ground lines. So we still need to maintain that, but in essence, in the same way where, we don't want the trees kind of growing on top of there. If that, the power of the underground line is theoretically, that might last for 30 or 40 years and not have a failure ever. So at this point in time, we definitely look at that a little bit differently, but then there again, the plant species that are growing on top of that, we're still looking for the grasses, for the wildflowers, for the stuff like that, that if the line does fail, there's easy access to get to it. So I kind of hope that answers that question.
So I want to jump in on Justin. What is the prognosis for adding more underground power? Is that anywhere in the planning process?
There's a lot that could be answered on that one, but yes, there's a lot of things that are kind of in the works right now. Arrowhead was awarded a federal grant called RDOF, which basically is going to be bearing a lot of fiber optics and electrical moving forward here. Myself, I've been working with the state kind of on some different grants, hazard mitigation grants that we're looking into. There's always the option of homeowners, to bury their lines or do stuff like that. Now that comes with a cost to them if they want to go from above ground to below ground. But yeah, it's definitely something that, we look at moving forward. And then also, working with people right now, if they would like to change kind of what's been there historically with them.
Great. Well, we have somebody that wants to know if you have any suggestions of who they could talk to at Lake County to discuss the issues you raised and just to connect, I think.
Yeah. So depending on where you're at, like the city of Silver Bay and Two Harbors is Minnesota Power. The rest of Lake County is Co-op Light and Power. To be very honest, I guess I'm not 100% sure of a contact there. I'm wondering if Stan, if you might know. No, but otherwise, if you look up, Minnesota Power, Co-op Light and Power, go to their web pages. They should have, right-of-way management areas or foresters or contacts like that for you to look at, basically my counterparts that would be over there.
Wonderful. And then one more question so far. I would like to hear more about cedar as a near, but not in the ROW row.
Yes. So that's actually a great question. So specifically with cedar, there again, each species of tree, in essence, is treated differently. So cedar is actually one that, cedar and pines, I call it, to easily explain, can be trained, they can be trimmed. Those branches don't keep growing out versus if you trim a birch tree, the very next year, it's going to go right to that opening, right to that light there. Cedar specifically is one where, within the 15-foot right of way, if there's an established tree there, and let's say I have the 10 to 12 feet, that tree would be just fine for the fact that it's so slow growing. The branches aren't the issue. You can really tell based on the root system and kind of the soils and rocks and what's going around there, if the tree itself could possibly be an issue. But for the most part, I'd say cedar is probably one of the best trees to have on the edge of right-of-ways if it's in an area that, is good for it.
Well, great. I think this might be a good time. Wayne, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of blend the notions of what to plant here with North Shore Forest Collaborative's information. We started out with the intent to try to bring back the native forest. which was really dominated by long life conifers, pre-settlement. And, there's an awful lot to do there. This will have to be tempered by changes in climate as we go, as I mentioned before, for sure. But right now, our promotion is to really promote the conifers. White cedar happens to be the main conifer, should be planted as per the historic record in north of Beaver Bay, which is our North Shore Till Plain Land Type Association. The southern area is a split rock till plain. And the only difference between the two till plains in terms of our recommendations is that white cedar, and this is by priority, then white spruce, and then white pine, so you can remember the whites. And then you get into tamarack and yellow birch, and then you get into the incidentals like elm and basswood and oaks and so on. In the southern part, below Beaver Bay, we just switch white pine to be to the top, and then white spruce, and then white cedar. So those species are really compatible with this conversation with the strip along the shore, but it seems to me also very compatible with the inland lines. We're not recommending things that are in the ecosystem that's further inland, because that is different. But I am thinking that this idea of prioritizing white cedar as much as we can, it really fits hand in glove with what we're trying to do. And obviously it's just in a strip, but to the degree that it can be handled further into the private land ownership that's alongside, that would be great. So in this notion of bringing in the shorter trees and the shrubs and so on, that's a ancillary kind of thing that we promote as well, but it's not something we have to push too much because we don't have the opportunity to really get into the short tree business. But the idea that hazel and dogwood and willows are very common here. So you really, if you open it up, you often get what you want in that regard anyway. You just have to be selective. And I'm a little curious as to how you train your contractors and sprayers and so on to identify, because there's a lot of trickiness involved in how to identify some of these species, especially if we start bringing in, a lot of the odd flower species or so on that they have to worry about.
Well, thank you so much, Wayne. Justin, I don't know if you wanted to address anything. Otherwise, we can go to some group conversation.
Yeah, I guess just on the tail end there with the contractors, the company that we're using now has many years of experience. A lot of them, if not all of them, are certified arborists. Kind of like the spray team is a little bit different than the mechanical team and so forth. But then they're again utilizing the different tools that I've already been out there and visited all the sites. That's kind of marked down on the maps for depending on what the work is that we're doing with the special care areas that we have to do. And as we implement more GIS and that sort of thing with our contractors, they'll have all that kind of at the touch of their hands there. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of things that we do to try to protect those resources, or to make sure that everybody's on the same page, whether it's a homeowner, myself, the contractors, and so forth.
Thank you, Justin. Stan, did you have a question? It looks like you were.
I do. I'm just curious if how much research has been done at all on any kind of planting that is important to the indigenous population, sweetgrass, stuff like that. I mean, I'm no plant person, but is some of that looked at?
To be, I guess, very specific, I don't have a current contact per se, but I had contacts like up on the Grand Portage Reservation. And yeah, we definitely talk about different areas like that, you know, they want extra care in for the sweetgrass, for the blueberry picking, that sort of thing. So it's basically, yeah, just having kind of an open conversation with the council, but just with each individual member up there too.
Yeah, because somebody brought up earlier the need to collaborate through this whole thing. And just for an example, I sit on Soil and Water, the Airport Commission, the Highway Commission, the Highway Commission, Arrowhead Board. And I can tell you and the county's actually looking at possibly putting together a terrestrial invasive coordinator or some kind of coordination. But I mean, we've got so many stakeholders, including the state of Minnesota, Portage, and I'm really nervous that we're going to start duplicating right-of-way spraying or right-of-way clearing. Or the fact is that if we could coordinate this work together, we could save everybody in this community probably a pretty good hunk of money. Because one of the biggest complaints that I get all the time as an Arrowhead board member is, you guys are only spraying herbicides to save you money. And then you have to explain to them the you is all of us. I mean, we're all in this in a big hunk, and we're trying to sort it out. And it frustrates me to see either duplication of some of that stuff or just not sitting down and chatting through it and getting a plan going. I appreciate this effort right here. And it's but it is more than just the Arrowhead right away that we have to deal with in this county. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Dan.
no, and I fully agree with that too. And that's kind of, you know, I was brought in to Arrowhead 100% based on my natural resources background. You know, that's kind of why I was recruited back in 2018 and then brought in-house this year. The collaboration, I mean, that's nothing to scoff at. And it's something that, you know, I've been kind of working on and dealing with even back in 2008. And I know that Molly and Dan and the North Shore Collaborative, it's kind of an ongoing thing of getting everybody at the table. And it's really tough when there's multiple agencies with jurisdiction and their own goals, you know, and to kind of get everyone there. But I think that there has been quite a bit of communication, you know, as far as I've seen, especially in these last 5 years, getting a lot more people at the table, discussing, sharing information. It's never going to be perfect, but I would say that, you know, we're bounds ahead right now compared to what we were probably 5 years ago across the board, not just Arrowhead, but, you know, all the organizations kind of communicating and talking and getting good relationship built here.
Thanks, Justin. It looks like there's a message in here from Molly that says the Cook County Invasive team does still meet twice a year to discuss such issues and coordination of treatments by different agencies. So just an FYI about that. Dan, you look like you popped up for a second about talking about sweetgrass. Did you want to talk about that for a second? Okay, I'm going to go with no, maybe he stepped away too. John, do you want to talk for a second and talk about kind of pulling this together, and then people have some time to speak as a community?
Yeah, thank you again, everybody, for your presentations and your willingness to share your technical expertise. I think it's been a fabulous conversation. We have what, Kelsey, 20 minutes or less now remaining on this Zoom meeting. So I know there's a lot of questions. I've jotted some down myself so people don't come up with any to get conversation going, but I'd love to hear from the audience questions that you may have to get a little interaction going. That'd be great. Maybe Mike, if you have any thoughts, if you're still there, you want to kick off any thoughts you currently have?
Yeah, John, I think I've run out of things to say.
Dan,
Okay.
as you're back, maybe you could, I had asked before if you had any comments about the sweetgrass. They were asking about sweetgrass. I think you were.
Yeah, it's a cool plant. There's not a lot of sources for it in the state. I've looked for it. I've got a little bit. It's hard to grow from seed, harder than most grasses. It just doesn't germinate that well from seed. So a lot of people take cuttings off of, it grows kind of in a bunch stature. So they cut rhizomes and kind of the side shoots off of that and then pot them and grow them from there. It's a cool plant. I think just sourcing it, you know, chatting, probably, you know, the folks in Grand Portage would probably have the best ideas of how to propagate that stuff efficiently. If people were interested in doing it on a larger scale. I have interest. I'm just nursed, you know, we just started. I've had little sets of it for 3 years, and we just started taking cuttings of it last year, and it just takes time. So yeah, that's about all I can say, but I've bumped into that plant quite a few times. They're bumped into people asking for more about that plant. So it's probably worth getting more out there and learning more about it.
Question for you, Dan. Maybe others have some expertise on this too. You listed quite a few native plant species, as we all know, and the North Shore is prone to deer, perhaps more so than a lot of other areas, certainly at this time of the year. Of those species, I know you mentioned dogwood. Obviously, it's deer candy at certain times of the year. Are there any of those that you listed that might be a little resistant to deer browse?
I mean, the 9-bark from shrub standpoint, the 9-bark and the nanny berry, deer. I mean, to me, it just seems really tough to predict when the deer will show up and what they'll eat that year. I mean, we've had years where they go through and they browse every species of one flower, and it's the same thing the following year, and they don't touch any of it. It's really kind of fussy. I mean, so from the shrubs, you know, elderberry is an awesome shrub, and from the, you know, like the, you know, can you use it for something standpoint, it is, you know, you can make stuff out of it. We've got a friend in Two Harbors, and there's more deer in Two Harbors than just about anywhere up here. And his elderberry does just fine grown without protection, which, you know, I always thought was a good example. Let's try elderberry then. Maybe the deer aren't going to eat it. And I planted it somewhere else and it got, you know, totally mowed down. So it's, you know, again, it's tough to say. I think the 9-bark, the nanny berry from a shrub standpoint, and the dogwood, I mean, it does get eaten by the deer, but it's still everywhere. I mean, once you get a set out there, I've never seen deer like, you know, completely kill a dogwood, at least a red osier dogwood stand. So it's still might be worth taking a crack at that. And a lot of those herbaceous wildflowers I put on there, the perennials, have an odor to it, like the monarda, the sunflower doesn't seem to get eaten. A lot of those goldenrods, actually a lot on that list of plants as far as the flowers go, don't seem to be that impacted by deer, for what that's worth. But you know, they could prove me wrong next year too on most of them. So I don't know what to expect.
And when you say elderberry, are you talking red-berried elder, I hope?
Yeah. Elderberry, the elderberry bush. Yeah.
Further south than here, but we have red-berried elder here. That's
Okay.
probably what you were saying anyway, but.
Kelsey, a question for you. If you could get, maybe you already have this, Justin's contact info, Dan's contact info, that would be great. I can type in my own email.
Yeah, but just a reminder, everybody, that I will be sending a follow-up email to all of you
Oh, great.
with all of the content that we have shared tonight with is the recording, but also links that have been shared or key slides, that sort of thing. So that way, if you were like me, didn't want to write all the notes, you still have a lot of the information. And I also asked our speakers to send back any links that they maybe didn't get a chance to talk about or thought about, but maybe didn't tell me enough about for me to collect. So they're going to send that afterwards. So that will go to you probably in the next couple of days. Look for that email.
Well, I don't want to speed through this at this point. We only have 15 minutes to go, but if people have questions in the audience, want to share some thoughts or experiences that they may have had, that would be great. I'd love to hear it.
John.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah.
You guys were on our property when, you know, Arrowhead came through, and, you know, we had a bunch of bushes planted and a dog fence. And I told the guys, you know, I got bushes and I got a dog fence, and then they just came and ripped it all to shreds, you know, and you know, and it's coming back, and obviously you can fix the dog fence, not a big deal. So
20 feet of dog fence.
you know, so
It was mold.
but in any event, I nevertheless, I appreciate this because it will give us the chance to, you know, talk to Arrowhead. And as an aside, I years ago had told them we had this stuff there. They allegedly had it in their records, and so I don't know what happened to that. But I still appreciate this very much, because it will give us a chance to, I think, plant the stuff we should plant. I mean, you've been to our place, and you know we put some of the right stuff in, and then we butchered it to some degree as well. So, you know, you kind of look forward to chatting with the Arrowhead folks to maybe get some good thoughts as to, you know, here's what you should really put in there. But I mean, just one thing for the Arrowhead folks on there, you know, I mean, I did talk to the contractor and pointed out what's there, and then they just came and ripped it all to hell. You know, even though I asked them very specifically to say, hey, beware, there's this, this, and this. So, you know, so there might be a little bit of work that needs to be done, you know, with some of the contracting folks, because I don't think they were very willing to listen. You know, but nevertheless, I appreciate this very much, because we're going to do some stuff under there, and we're going to have some fun with it, and we enjoy that sort of stuff, as you know.
Great. Thanks for sharing
and that's
that, Rob,
something
man.
too, if you feel like reaching out to me, can kind of come take a look and see what happens. And
yeah,
it's definitely been a growing process, but I think, you know, we're sitting pretty good with the people that we have working for us moving forward here. So hopefully stuff like that does not happen in the future.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, as I say, I'm looking forward to having a whack at this. So you'll hear from us, you know, sometime next spring. So we appreciate that.
Good deal.
Thanks, Rob. Rob's also on our executive committee for the North Shore Forest Collaborative, so greatly appreciate your time and your commitment to our process too. Other thoughts or questions? Maybe you've had experience where you have done some planting under the power lines as well. Anybody else on the call would like to share that? Maybe not.
If you don't want to speak, you are welcome to put your contact or the information into the chat, and I'm happy to read it too. I understand sometimes people want privacy.
I also see Molly. Thank you, Molly. Again, I was going to be putting the presentations, this presentation on North Shore Forest Collaborative website, as well as Sugarloaf's. So if you want to go back or have somebody else take a look at it, let them know.
And I'm just going to do an echo of that, John. In the chat, I put information about the North Shore Forest Collaborative presentation that we did last year, just in case you missed that. It was a really great informational session about how landowners can work at helping restore the forest in our area. So I would encourage you to check that out. I also, we're going to put in the chat a little information about sustainability in Northeast Minnesota that was done by Dave Abaz and his Vista volunteers, which does talk a little bit about the assisted migration of trees and some other pieces that may be interesting to you after this conversation.
Great.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. I've got a small amount of property down between Beaver Bay and Split Rock Park. And I attended the Sugarloaf annual meeting, and I'm concerned about looking forward with warming and what's happening to the boreal forest. And what would people have to say about anticipating a warming effect in terms of the issues we've been talking about tonight?
I think that might be a good one for Well, Dan, you could certainly cover that, but I'd like to get Wayne's perspective, having not only has he been in conversation with David Abaz from the university, but Wayne's been at this for quite a few decades related to these kind of subjects, and has pretty good knowledge of what might be working down the road as well. So I'd like to give your thoughts here, Wayne, on that question. I think you're on mute, though.
Yeah, I think, you know, Dan was hitting it pretty well when he was sort of promoting the idea of bringing in some of the more southerly species. And that's the sort of the focus now for many of the agencies as to what would be better suited up here. At this point, there isn't enough solid information to sort of promote, recommend. But a lot of people are just throwing stuff out. I mean, I don't particularly think that's a good recommendation to just grab stuff from, you know, wherever and throw it out, because we just don't know how it will react. But the North Shore Forest Collaborative, as I said, was initially started back in 2011. We wanted to promote the historic species here, and really what we assume is going to happen under climate change will not be so drastic that it keeps those species that we're recommending at bay or destroys them. Particularly cedar and spruce are sort of adapted to heavy snow loads and a little bit more wind than something like white pine. But it's also, spruce is also one that would probably succumb more to heat than the other ones, right? You know, within the near future. So we're still kind of working with that assumption that we've got those species that we know were native and they can resist the change in what we assume will be some pretty harsh weather. They can take it. I mean, these species grow in places that have similar weather now. So we know that. Also know that something like white pine will often break under heavy loads of branch stress. The branches will break off, but they also bend pretty well. So they can take a lot of high wind. I guess the main point that we have to be concerned about, especially when it comes to these lines, is how will the wind that we're expecting and get now, you know, I think you may have mentioned this, Justin, but the idea of how will it handle the stress from being just uprooted and turn over and actually take down the lines in the cases of putting them next to the line. So we have to kind of work with that in mind. But, you know, I used to really push the idea of bringing back the natives, but I don't know where to you know, draw the line. It's just that right now, what we know of is that the natives will do okay for quite a while, many decades. But I think, you know, Dan was hitting some of this business of bringing in species that will do okay in more warm conditions. And probably that's what we'll have to start looking at. We just don't know all the answers to that yet.
I guess one thing I'd add, I mean, the effects on the trees proper one thing, but then I think a lot of the bug pressures and unknown pests that haven't gotten here yet are probably of concern too. And I mean, time will tell. I don't know how to mitigate some of that stuff. You can lose a lot of sleep at night stewing about that stuff. But I think, you know, like Wayne said, again, that, you know, sticking with the natives and then within the native suite, trying to get as much diversity on the landscape is probably the best way to hedge our bets against, you know, all of it, whether it's an acute plant impact or whether it's a a forest pest that winds up showing up down the road.
Mike, you're going to say something?
Yeah, John Selstad, I put a comment in the chat there's a climate change guide, field guide for northern Minnesota forests. It's available at the website I dropped into the chat. And I think, Wayne has and Dan have addressed this pretty well, is that, the changes that are expected for the most part for the species that we're most interested in the North Shore Forest Collaborative, the impacts probably won't be seen for a long time. I think many of those species, if you look at the guide, are ones that will be either winners or that they will not be affected a lot. Some of the things that I see that may happen is we've got different, what I'd call small populations of certain species on the landscape, more inland than right on the shore in this area that the North Shore Forest Collaborative is interested in, with the exception of the area around Two Harbors and specifically the bur oak that is growing there. Historic records show that when it was warmer and drier in Minnesota, the oak areas in the Arrowhead were much bigger than they are now. And so there's a lot of genetics that are already here that are adapted to that warmer climate. So John, your property is, may have some of those species on it. I don't know, I've not been there, but I'm like Wayne. I don't, I'm not against adaptive, moving plants where it might make sense, or to look at how things might adapt in the future. But I also think that we've got a lot of genetics in the plants that we already have that will continue to work well in even the warmest climates that may be predicted. And the research on that is in this guide, Climate Change Field Guide for Northern Minnesota Forests. So.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that share. I really appreciate it. John, I want to give you an opportunity to close things out and give people a good night adieu. So if you'd like to talk for a second.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. Again, thank you. And really appreciate you facilitating this. It's been my honor to help host this meeting tonight. I'm really happy how many people really hung in there this whole time. It gives you some sense of the passion people have for this subject. I think we hit the right note here. And Justin, thank you for approaching us initially. I think it was spot on. The presentation was great, and you answered a lot of questions, I think, in people's minds. Dan, again, really helpful in providing great detail of what's possible on people's properties. Mike and Wayne, again, thank you. Your expertise is always welcome. And thank you for those who participated here by coming and listening, and hopefully we'll do some great positive things on the landscape going forward on your property under rights of way. And so again, thank you on behalf of the North Shore Forest Collaborative. Have a great night, and thank you, Kelsey, as you close things out.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate all the great speakers and thoughts that were shared tonight. It's better minds bring us all together for the future, and we can do better things. So I encourage people to check through the resources I'm going to send out to you. Also, if you want to hang out a minute or two later, you're welcome to, but I want to also allow those that need to depart